In the United States, any person who is accused of committing a crime is presumed innocent. And the prosecutor has the burden to prove his case against that person beyond a reasonable doubt. So in this video, we're going to try to explain what exactly is reasonable doubt and how is that different from the everyday doubts that we all have. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a legal standard that we apply at criminal trials. So before we can define it, first we have to ask ourselves, how do we even get to trial? If a prosecutor believes that somebody committed a crime, he can bring charges against that person. Those charges can come in two forms. One is called the information, being informally charged. Or the prosecutor can go to the grand jury and ask for them to give a formal charge. That formal charge is called an indictment. Now that we have the charge against the person, that individual will plead not guilty to the crime because that person is innocent. And in fact, by the time we get to trial, the person is presumed innocent unless and until the prosecutor can prove that that person committed the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And I know I just said unless and until. I don't really like the word until because it makes it feel like enough time passes and that person will be found guilty. And that's not true. The jury can have actually innocent person before them. No matter how long the time passes, that person will remain innocent. But if the prosecutor is successful at proving the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, then the jury can convict that person. As you may already know, the Constitution does not define beyond a reasonable doubt. The Supreme Court and other courts throughout the country have seen these simple words be litigated over and over again because people cannot agree on what exactly they mean. If you're in the Southern District of California, as a juror, you might see the Ninth Circuit jury instructions. So first, let's take a look at that language and see if you can understand it. And then we can look at fun examples and see the difference between reasonable doubt and regular doubt. So first, the jury instructions. Under the Ninth Circuit jury instructions, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced the defendant is guilty. It is not required that the government prove the guilt beyond all possible doubt. A reasonable doubt is doubt based upon reason and common sense. It is not based on pure speculation. It may arise from a careful and impartial consideration of all evidence or from lack of evidence. If after a careful and an impartial consideration of all the evidence, you're not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty, it is your duty to find the defendant not guilty. On the other hand, if after careful and an impartial consideration of all evidence, you're convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty, it is your duty to find the defendant guilty. If after listening to this jury instruction, you went, huh? I don't get it. Well, I'm here to give you fun examples. First, let's pretend you're at a grocery store and you're buying a dozen eggs. What's the first thing you do? You probably open up the packaging to make sure that none of them are broken. Even though the company tells us that they have quality control and they're careful during shipment, we still check because we have our doubts. And those doubts are reasonable. All of us do it. But in criminal trials, You don't get to open things up. You don't get to go to the crime scene and check on everything. You get to sit down and listen to the prosecutor, to the defense attorney, maybe to the defendant, witnesses, cops, and hear what they get to say, what they saw. So really the example is your wife calling you and saying, "You didn't forget to buy the eggs, right?" And you go, "No, I got them." And then she asks you, "Well, did you check if any of them are broken? Did you make sure that they're not?" And you go, no, of course, I did. I checked. I made sure that they're all good." Well, she may still have her doubts. And the question is whether those doubts are reasonable. Are you trustworthy enough? Does she trust you? Or are you a sloppy husband that never checks when you purchase food and bring it back home? Now, the next example is if she calls you and asks you if you purchased that strawberry jam. And you say yes, and she asks you, "Well, did you make sure it's strawberry?" And you go, "Well, yeah, of course. I looked at the label. I can see through the jar. It looks like it's strawberry." And she goes, "Well, did you check? Did you actually taste it?" "Well, of course not. Those are not reasonable doubts. Those are just doubts. She's just doubting you. There's nothing reasonable about it. Nobody at the store tastes strawberry jam before buying it. We just trust it." The next thing is buying chips. None of us open the packaging to make sure that the chips that are on the label are actually inside. But after all, Frito-Lays can have a problem during shipment, or they can have a problem during making the chips. And if you get that evidence in, that the company had a recall because they put the wrong chip in the wrong bag, well then you may have your doubts, and those doubts can even become reasonable. So now that you see that in everyday life, we see and we have our doubts, and some of those are doubts reasonable, and some of them are not. So now that you understand how this works, I hope you enjoyed this video. Click like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, so next time I post, you'll be first to know.